Hi, welcome to Critical Myth Theory. My name's Alexander.
My name's Joel.
Let's get into it.
All right, so today we are going to be talking about C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, 7-book series. Yeah, well, our first point is going to follow the structure that we did with our Lord of the Rings episode. So our first point is going to be talking about what the Chronicles of Narnia are and the inspiration. This one's going to be a bit shorter. C.S. Lewis, a little bit more like that. J.R.R. Tolkien, it's going to be deeper and more direct reasons.
Yeah.
And then our second point will be some of the biggest themes that separate it from The Lord of the Rings. I don't think that we're going to talk about the movies. There's 3 of them, and and 1 or 2 of them are good, in my opinion. Yeah. Actually, you know what? It's straight up objective. 1 or 2 of them are good. Like the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is pretty good cinematic, but
sure.
Yeah. Anyway,
but yeah, we can talk about movie quality at some point, but that's not really why I wanted to talk about this topic. So I think we can kind of shy away from the topic.
Yeah, man, I get so passionate about this stuff because it bothers me. The second one's good.
Anyways,
I just had to say. And then the third one, as usual, it's going to be our longest point. This one's going to be themes and questions in the books. We're going to get into some and we're going to miss others.
Right.
And ones that we miss, we can always catch up in a later episode.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say, kind of as a... I hope you like the sound of Joel's voice, mostly because of the fact that I genuinely don't remember a lot about the books. I read them as a kid, and I admit I haven't touched them since. I understand that there's actually a lot of content for an adult to go back and reflect on the series, but I just haven't, and I kind of feel embarrassed saying so, but that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm gonna mostly rely on Joel's knowledge here to kind of get through the conversation.
Do you know what, man? You were our Lord of the Rings expert. You can
I'll take it.
Yeah, and look, that's some of the episodes. One of us is going to be a bit more expert on one, and the other one will be expert on another. Yeah. And it's nice having 2 people for that.
I'll admit, if we were talking about any of his non-fictional work, then I'd probably have a lot more to say about it. But given that we're talking about Narnia in particular, certainly not my area of expertise.
You would have the edge on me on
perhaps,
the
perhaps
stuff. But I think we should really just dive into the points. So our first point: what are the Chronicles of Narnia and the inspiration?
Yeah, no, I should probably ask the question because again, I need you to answer. So, what are the Chronicles of Narnia?
Oh, okay. Well, the Chronicles of Narnia is a 7-book series, C.S. Lewis. It's Christian mythology and this biblical allusion, almost. It's got sort of some shamanistic and also folklore elements to it, although I guess shamanism is a little bit of a scary word in this case.
Right.
I don't mean it sort of in a religious element, but in the animals being of equal value to the humans, like some of them at least being intelligent. I think that is warranted. And the Chronicles of Narnia are a fantasy. And I think that this moves straight on to the second point because we might as well move straight into it. For sure. The biggest themes that separate it from The Lord of the Rings, our world is still connected into it.
Right.
Where the main effects, for better or for worse, in the world of Narnia are run by humans and their leadership.
Right.
And the beasts, being intelligent, still follow the human lead. There's Helen and Frank in the first book, or it depends how you look at it, chronologically or by publication. But The Magician's Nephew, we're going to be calling it 1st through 7th by chronology. Rather than publication. The first book you have Frank and Helen, who are your son of Adam and daughter of Eve. That's going to be your monarch and the descendants. After that's going to be the Pevensies. Right. And after that's going to be Caspian's line. All of them somehow either descended or from Earth.
Right.
So that's a big difference. Earth and Narnia are very connected. Narnia is almost contingent on our world because that main effect is that main effect of good and evil is by humans from Earth, from our world.
So it almost seems like because there's Tolkien doesn't even have this in the same world. Like his content's not even in the same world. It's completely separate, right? The main characters, the ones that we kind of read through, are not even human. They're not even from Earth. They're not from London. Whereas the children that we read through in Narnia, from what I understand, they're from Earth, right? So I think that speaks volumes into the actual content, from what I understand, right? The it's almost like there's this thicker veil of the storytelling in Tolkien. Tolkien kind of came at it from, I want to tell a story. Yeah, there will be themes and symbols behind it, but a lot of stuff I'm just telling a story. Whereas Lewis had often, from what I understand of it, made more effort into showing the connection to our world and how this specific theme speaks to our world.
Well,
Right?
and you're absolutely right about that, because I think C.S. Lewis deals with more like current events. Well, at least current in his time, World War II being one of them, and religious and political questions as well. Political, vaguely. You'll see that in Eustace Scrubb in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader being this very liberal rights type of guy, and definitely to a fault. And so those are some really big differences between The Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. Chronicles of Narnia are very connected to and kind of contingent on our world, and also deals with current events, religious, current for its time, of course, religious and political themes. Once again, not so much political, but there is some. Some of the ideas of Lewis really come out. Some of those current philosophic ideas.
Right.
Whereas for Tolkien, it's more, I would say, deeply mythological. And I know, but like, it's more specifically Christian.
Right.
And maybe I should say pagan mythology, I think, repurposed for this kind of, for Lord of the Rings, it's pagan mythology almost repurposed for a Christ-like message. Sure. Although that's still not the point. The Christ-like message is still not the point.
So would you, kind of a question here for you then, would you almost wonder then, is that going to speak into the success of the two franchises? Because we see now that the Lord of the Rings is taken as, I would say literary success. I mean, like you read it in school, and it's very well known by so many people. Whereas something like Chronicles of Narnia, people will refer to it as a children's series, and I do believe that. I mean, I don't think it's. I mean, like I said, as much as I understand that Narnia has its good reading for adults, it is, I'd say, often more understood to be children reading. Do you think that is probably the big theme as to why there's such a big difference in their cultural acceptance, or is it more the Christian message that's more alluded to in Narnia's series than it is in Tolkien's?
Yeah, I can kind of understand that. I would say that both are going to have lasting effects. One, I would say Lord of the Rings, having the element of not being as contemporary as it was and being otherworldly.
Right.
It has the benefit of that. I think it can transcend time.
Okay.
Like that, because the technology is and the mythology and the story and everything, it's very, very relevant to the world that it's in. Whereas Chronicles of Narnia doesn't quite have that benefit, being very tied into the world at its time. All the same, though, I think that the Chronicles of Narnia won't die. I think that it will continue to be valuable. If our Lord doesn't come back in 2 centuries or something like that, I think it will continue to be. I think it will be. It will continue to be valuable and remembered.
Right. Do you think in the secular realm it would be as well?
Maybe not as much, but still, because C.S. Lewis still had a very strong impact in philosophy, just generally.
Right.
He was a Christian philosopher, but he's not in the he's not as it's not as if he were in a circle called Christian philosophy where everything else was
Right.
outside. He was very influential in his time and still after. Especially, I think that's where a lot of his other writings are going to be pretty useful at keeping himself as a piece of history. So I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried that the Chronicles of Narnia are going to die off.
No, and I don't even know if that was necessarily my concern, but more just how popular it was in particular. I also wonder if perhaps some of the movie quality has definitely influenced that as well.
Yeah.
How many people would know about Lord of the Rings if the movies weren't such good quality? And if Narnia had... and this is kind of where we disagree, I think, and I disagree with a lot of people in my circles who defend the Narnia movies. I think they're good. Kind of. I'm not going to sit there and say that they're great movies. They're not quality movies.
They're not Lord of the Rings value.
Certainly not. And now I don't think I could put any movie really up to the quality of Lord of the Rings, but even, but there's still, I don't know, there's something missing. I have a hard time taking them seriously, to be perfectly honest with you. And that, you know what, it could be entirely subjective. For what I understand, it isn't. It is actually a bit more objective, that they're just not quality cinema. And I wonder how much of that has influenced their popularity.
Well, we're not going to avoid the movie question, so let's just get into that one real briefly. Well, we'll keep it brief. We'll try to.
Right.
The second one I really liked. The second book, the first movie. So The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That one, I think, was faithful to the books, and it did not shy away from the deep themes that were and those really deep things that were exposed in that Christ-like story, that Christ-like sacrificial story, that, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And the picture was done pretty well.
Right.
The problem is once they start importing current day things into the movies. One of them, for example, would be, and this completely ruined the movie for me, was Prince Caspian and Susan having some romantic whatever it was, like they just make out at the end of the movie, and it took away from it completely.
Right.
It took away from what I knew the future was going to be for Caspian and his descendants.
Right.
And Susan doesn't end up. She doesn't end up good.
Right.
She ends up unfaithful anyway. It's sort of this. It's this modern desire to just make everything romantic, no matter what the consequences are.
I don't even know if it's like. I'd almost chalk it up to teenage romance, like a teenage drama. You have to add it because that's kind of the demographic that you're aiming for, right?
Yeah.
At least for that character. You know what I mean? If you want to relate to that character, she's a teenage girl, and so you want to add that teenage drama. Whereas you didn't get that drama in something like Lord of the Rings because there was no character that was in that age bracket to have that demographic being sold to, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's a part of it, part of the reason why we see that. But that's just me kind of musing mindlessly. And
then Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I liked a lot more than Prince Caspian in terms of movie. Like there are some parts where it's unfaithful to the books, but I think almost in a benefit. Sure. One of them is where Prince Caspian and Edmund almost like fall apart.
Right.
What was it that they were fighting over? I think that they were fighting over kingship, and at one point a beautiful deistic type, is it not deistic, a goddess-like woman who sort of was like the needle of the compass.
Oh, okay.
One of the stars, I think, in the movies. But that one, I think, kind of added a little bit more depth to Caspian and to Edmund. And I didn't mind that they made Reepicheep, like even his voice, a little bit more respectable and manly and everything like that in the movie. There are some things where it's like it's different, and I don't mind it, but it is also different than the books in a few ways like that. And I thought, and that's the one where I'm like, yeah, maybe 2 are good.
Right.
But
I also wonder if there's something to be said for just the actual content itself being transferable to a movie screen.
Yeah.
Right. I wonder if it's easier to visualize because it again, Tolkien's is a story in and of itself, right? It's telling this epic story that can be visualized. Whereas I think something like Lewis, again, you're reading between the lines.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Right. And so perhaps some of the things, like for example, Talking Beaver, it will take you out of the story when you see it, but when you read about it, it's different, right? I don't know. That's maybe that's just me, but like because that's from a movie making perspective, that's such a hit or miss thing for one thing, right? Because there's that realm of
there's the issue of Aslan itself, himself, exactly. Like not like trying to depict him on the screen as well in the way that the books.
I wonder if there's a struggle with that then between the two, because again, I can't take Narnia as a movie series seriously, and I wonder now. I mean, kind of as we're sitting here musing about them, I'm wondering if even if it was 100% faithful to the book, right? That being said, I take the series seriously, but in and of itself. But that could be because it's, written content that has the stuff in between the lines.
I just also want to say for the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the casting of Eustace Scrubb was brilliant.
Okay.
It was brilliant. He was obnoxious but also kind of silly, and you kind of hated the guy and then you kind of liked the guy, and I think he did the trick of playing this pompous stuck-up guy who reforms.
Okay.
I thought that the 5th one was really good cinematically because you're dealing with monsters and beasts and same way that Lord of the Rings does. So I think that one did all right. Actually, as we're talking about it, I might have become more favorable to it as.
Sure.
And The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's the symbolic point that matters, and the symbolic point is done pretty well in the movies.
Yeah. No, I'll give you that.
Prince Caspian, still total flop for me. That movie was a total flop for me.
Right.
I wonder if they, if the deal didn't fall out, if they should have kept making those movies though.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing too. Is I think with something like that, like you really want to stay true to as much of the content, having a plan, right? Like I think to me, I could talk about Lord of the Rings all the time, and I probably definitely should stay away from this topic. But I think one of the biggest successes is that they made the 3 movies the same time, which definitely helped because there was no disconnect. There was no worry about it not continuing. Right? There's so much quality of just knowing that it's going to be the same quality basically across the series. Whereas if you take it, you do it like as you do in current Hollywood, where you're having a movie now, in a couple of years you make the sequel. The quality can change quite drastically in a couple of years, right? Anyways, but that's again we can. I
think we should leave the movies for now, and I think you're thinking the same.
Right.
And I think we should get into what we do best, which is talking about the themes and the questions.
Yeah, for sure.
And these are going to be some of the themes. There are so many themes. If you got any that you really think we should touch on, we'll make another episode at some point.
Yeah. I honestly like. If we're going to be missing any themes, then let us know as well afterward, because honestly it makes a great conversational piece to reflect back on these sorts of things, especially for someone like me who maybe needs to go back and read the series again, right? And actually look for these themes as we go through them. So for now, basically, I'm going to be asking you about questions about themes, and we're going to see how it goes. So,
well, I think the first thing we should talk about is perhaps Aslan himself.
Right.
So we were kind of talking about him a little bit earlier before we got up and recorded this episode, and we're talking about the different ways that he's represented in books. Right. Like in the first book, and once again chronologically, in the first book, The Magician's Nephew, he's represented as the creating word. He speaks and he sings, and things come to life, and this empty room becomes the world of Narnia, and the beasts come alive out of the ground, and some are given intelligence.
Right.
And he's sort of got this logos element. He breathes life, and then further on intelligence into these creatures.
Okay.
And Lewis immediately puts Narnia sort of as a contingent world to our world by not creating man.
Okay.
Like Aslan is not creating man, but man is going to rule Narnia, and rightfully so. Okay. Son of Adam, daughter of Eve.
Right.
In the second book, Aslan is the Christ sacrifice. This is definitely his most famous book, and rightfully so. His most famous Chronicles of Narnia book.
Yeah.
And
yeah, this is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We should probably. I mean, I know it's pretty clear, but
yeah. No, yeah, fair enough. The Christ sacrifice. He takes his Edmund's place as the traitor,
right?
And dies for him. Comes back to life because his sacrifice was done without guilt,
mm-hmm.
and kills the White Witch,
right?
Whom Diggory, one of the main protagonists of The Magician's Nephew, brought into Narnia,
right?
And so sin is immediately brought into creation in The Magician's Nephew. In the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, not only does Aslan's reclaim Edmund's life, but also kills the White Witch, and so that not that the sin is gone, because there's still future events that, well, aren't great. You know, right. the new world hasn't come, but the claim on that world by a tyrannical, magical usurper of a different world is defeated and killed.
Okay.
In the third book, he is almost the...
It's the horse and his boy.
Yeah, right? The horse and his boy, yeah. I should specify that.
It's all good, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, but Aslan represents this go-behind type of character, both a comfort, right. but also a prompter and the mover forwards. Like, come on, Shasta and Erebus, get going. You've got a mission.
Right.
Let's go. You know, you've got to warn King Loon against Rabbadash.
Okay.
So you can think of him as the Lord who goes behind.
Right.
And I think that I'll move to the fifth rather than the fourth, which is...
we're skipping a book here.
Yeah, I'll move back to that one, because...
This is Prince Caspian, right? This is the movie that you hated, right?
The fourth is Prince Caspian. No, the fifth is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and this one is the moral compass towards himself. That's where Aslan is. You know, you're moving towards Aslan's land, and he helps you along that way as the compass, the moral compass towards the east.
Right.
And so he is the go behind in the third, and the going forward in front of you.
Okay.
In the fifth, and that's why I jumped to the fifth.
Okay. I was just skipping Prince Caspian because you hated the movie, right?
And the book, I like the book.
Okay, that's good.
And I think that it's supposed to be one of my favorites. It's actually not, but that's just happenstance. I think that's just a taste.
That's just you being weird, right?
That's me being weird. That's right.
I'm kidding, man.
No, it's true.
No. Anyways.
Yeah, but it's very much in the fourth book. Yes, a moral compass again, but it's almost for Caspian, it's this symbol of what he's supposed to be and the values that he's supposed to embody as the king, and as the rightful and new king of Narnia. It's almost this new dynasty,
right?
This is tested when help seems not to have come. Nickabrick, the dwarf, and two companions, a hag and a werewolf, they think of a plan to conjure up the White Witch again, which it's implied that they very well could have.
Okay.
And they're going to, because it's a little bit of bad, It's that temptation of a little bit of bad, perhaps for the greater good. You're doing it for perhaps the greater good. That's a theme that we're going to be that we're going to be talking about, and it's always there in every story with temptation.
Right.
Just do this little bit of bad for the greater good. And it's tested, right? I mean, his loyalty to the good, to his people, and to Aslan is tested, because it seems like help hasn't come, although it's right at its doorstep, as Truffle Hunter says, the badger.
Right.
But he still defies this tempting offer, and he, Dr. Cornelius and Truffle Hunter the badger, they fight Knickerbrick, the werewolf, and the hag, and Peter and Edmund burst into the room with Trumpkin, and they defeat the three. That was sort of the moment of testing. That was the moment of moral testing, that temptation. And so Caspian has truly aligned himself with the symbol of the good, with Aslan, with that right direction of what he should be as a king. And the stakes are, I can't stress the stakes enough.
Okay.
At this point. I think it's the most important part of that book.
Okay.
And you might say that second battle of Baruna is, I don't think so. I think I think that's the deciding point of whether this king is going to be a true king of Narnia.
Right. Okay.
And be the last dynasty of Narnia as well. And Aslan is also the coronator of this king, if that's a word. He makes him the rightful king.
Right. Okay.
Of the new age. It's now a new age.
Right.
The old one's done. The Telmarine occupation is over. It's land back to the beasts with the humans as the leaders. Okay, so we could move on to the sixth book, which is The Silver Chair.
Right.
And this is Aslan as the path. You know, it's what would Aslan have us do, says Eustace and Jill.
Right.
And it's through doing what Aslan would want them to do, morally speaking, following that moral compass, following that path, that they'll succeed. And they fall off of that path a few times. One of them in particular is when they get caught by the giants, because they went off the path, not the physical path, but that moral path. And they almost eat, and kind of ignorantly eat, a talking stag, which is, and Puddleglum says, no, this is, do not take another bite, you know. So this path of, if you follow this path, then you will do what is good. You will do what Aslan had sent you out to do.
Right.
The seventh book is pretty clear. Aslan is the end. This is his last coming. It's the eschaton. He's calling the world to an end and ushering in the new one.
Right.
It's described in the last battle, which is the seventh book, as if the old Narnia were a mirror image of the new one. It's a beautiful image. And so Aslan fulfills so many Christ-like rules. Not only the creating word, which is the beginning of the world, so very much that Genesis creation story.
Well, the John 1, right? Like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Logos.
And then the second book, the Christ sacrifice.
Right.
And then the comfort and the prompter and the mover forwards of his people to go and do his to do his mission.
Mm-hmm.
And then also as a symbol of the good and kingly direction, and the coronator
Mm-hmm.
of the king of the new age, the moral compass towards him. So he walks behind us, but also before us. He's also the path, the way that we should go, and our decisions on which path should we take. One of them is his path.
Right.
And the end as well. Not just the creation, but also the end.
Yeah,
he
the
calls
the coming king, right?
Yeah.
Like,
so very, very Christ-like allusion.
mm-hmm.
And he definitely, it's undoubted that he represents the Christ character in this story. And it's his will that is done throughout all of these books. It's these preordained things that he has for these protagonists to do, that they don't do in full. They don't do it correctly in full, but he helps them along the way, and he helps them stumble towards the end. And then I think that we can really start getting into the themes, knowing who are very necessary and underlying characters, that being Aslan. I think we can really start getting into those,
Right.
into some of the deep themes of the Chronicles of Narnia. So which one did you want to get into first?
Yeah. Well, why don't we... I mean, you kind of mentioned earlier, in our personal conversation, I should mention, there's a theme in the books about good freedom, so I'm kind of curious as to what you mean by that.
Okay, yeah. So one thing I would say that I would talk about before we talk about freedom,
right,
per se, is sort of the contrariness of Narnia and a southern nation, Calormen.
Okay.
And the very obvious contrast that C.S. Lewis has. So one of these things is that Calormen's very much this. It's almost got this Indian caste system where it's a very strict social strata, and you're born into the social strata and you act accordingly.
Okay.
And it's kind of tyrannical as well. You don't even question the Tisroc if you're his own son.
Right.
And that's opposed to Narnia, where it's more, I take care of the people below me and they respect me. But you know, like one thing Eustace points out that I think is funny enough is there's no taxes.
Right.
You know, there's this freedom and unrestrained joy, and a good type of joy. You know, these beasts, these talking and non-talking beasts, they roll around and play, and they do their thing.
Right.
They really are a community rather than an empire or a kingdom. Like even the term king is kind of loose,
right,
because it's very much more a community.
Right.
But they have to fight against other kingdoms that would subject them to tyranny, and one of them being the giants, other ones being the Calormens.
Right. It almost sounds like there's a proper understanding of power in Narnia versus the misuse of it in the kingdom of the Calmorians. Yeah, sorry.
Calormens, yeah.
But yeah, because like you were saying that like you work for the people below you, right? Like you were given power to serve,
Mm-hmm.
right? So anyone who's been given power, and this is just in general, right? We're going to kind of lean into the discussion of freedom and power, I think, as just a philosophical discussion. And I'm going to see if I can relate it back to Narnia as best as I can, or you can at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there's this, right? We are each of us given a certain amount of power for the task that we are responsible for, right? So a king is given exactly the amount of power that he needs, not to serve himself, not so that he can live in comfort or enjoy, but so that he can make others do so, and in so doing then gaining that joy. Whereas a misunderstanding of power, which is the tyranny, where it's you're using the power that you have mostly for your own good, and then you're working that else kind of trickles down naturally because, maybe helping out the people below you sometimes is going to be beneficial for you. It's almost like that selfish motivation versus the selfless motivation, because it's exactly the misunderstanding of power.
That's right. I mean, it's not as if you have power just to have power over people and for your own good. A proper understanding of hierarchy, and I'm not sure C.S. Lewis was completely anti-hierarchy or anything like that. A proper understanding of it, the one that I really like, is the one where the people above take care of the people below, and the ones below respect the people above and look for direction. It's almost this Confucian type of type of respect. It's sort of an old value that I wish we had in our society. But I digress. And then there's other comparisons too, like one of them is this is seen in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader when Caspian goes to the Lone Islands. The Lone Islands are theoretically under Narnian rule. However, it seems to have been influenced by Calormen a lot because Calormen is trading slaves there.
Right.
And the Narnians haven't been there in 150 years, something like that. And so while in theory the governor reports to the Narnians and issues laws in the name of Narnia, he's really just ruled by greed, by power, and by vice, and also by laziness as well, I would say. I mean, he's rather ineffectual as well. And it's this slavery versus freedom theme where the Calormens and the pirates, they're trading slaves, and the Narnians are outraged at this. Caspian's outraged at this and abolishes slavery on the island as what it is. It's not making a living. It's not that issue. It's the issue of trading free-willed people against their will and taking away their power and therefore their responsibility to do any good in the world, besides serve their one particular master that they happen to get landed on lucky or unlucky. And so I guess that's really getting into the theme of freedom to do good.
Right.
That question. And when you have freedom, there's this autonomous power element, and from a previous episode we were really talking about power implies responsibility to do good. When you have power, you can use it for yourself, and you can, but it's a misuse, because you have a responsibility to yourself but also to your community and to those around you, because, well, I think that it's already inherent that it is better to give rather than to keep for yourself.
Right.
Like, people just understand that as a basic fact. But also because we've been delegated to love. Jesus says in the book of John, I forget where, I give only this command, love one another.
Right.
Which is a lot more difficult than what it sounds. And it's this freedom with this autonomous power to actually use it, not because you have to, but freely. It's a generous giving of good, of love, and of beneficence, if that's a word. I'm going to call it a word. That's pretty cool. I'm totally claiming it if it's not.
Copyright. Well,
so,
I was going to ask a question about the islands in particular that we were talking about earlier. Is there, would you say, and I'm just going to throw this out there, was there a theme of neglecting responsibility? Sounds like, because you said earlier that it was ruled officially by Narnia, but it wasn't exactly visited by the Narnians for a very long time. And so it seems as though they were neglecting their responsibility in maintaining that area. Is that perhaps something that you could suggest? Because
No, fair enough, but I don't think so. And the reason is because it was Telmarine rule before Caspian,
okay,
and the Telmarines, they are sort of enemies. Because we're going for the old Narnians,
Right.
the talking beasts and the people who rule them rightly.
Mm-hmm.
The Telmarines were afraid of the east because they were afraid of the forests at the east end of Cair Paravel, where things just happened to be a little bit more magical, and so they're worried about ghosts, very superstitious. So they didn't even see fair. So it's complete neglect by fear, actually, and which is Miraz sends his 7 lords who are loyal to the Caspian's line.
Mm-hmm.
He sends them out that way because he's like, yep, they're gonna die. It's a pretended sort of a pretended honor,
Right.
sort of in the way that Saul gets David to kill 100 Philistines. It's like this pretended honor, and you will get riches and rewards and all the stuff, but this is a plan to kill you,
Right.
type of deal.
Now, but at the same time, I mean, it seems as though, again, like there's this, right? Because we mentioned it was neglected. Is there an allusion at least to, perhaps a Christian life where we have been given kingship over certain areas of our own life, and if we neglect to rule them properly, then we can start to see the enemy slip into those areas and misuse those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whether it be something like our sexuality or our money or our free time or our thinking time. I mean, these are very areas that can very easily be neglected because of fear, right? Like you were saying, how they avoided these islands because they were afraid. And I mean, I wonder if there's some sort of allusion to that. I mean, that was kind of where my mind went when you were talking about them, so I thought maybe there's something there. But
no, I think so. All the same, I think that's pretty cool to talk about. I'm glad you picked up on that because good takes moral effort. It takes a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's an example where in The Horse and His Boy, where Shasta has defended the horses and Erebus against the lion, whom they don't know that it's Aslan at the time.
Right.
And he's making sure that they go forward at full speed. And he bravely stands up to him, as if he were a dumb lion who's going to kill them all. And so he does this good and courageous thing. He gets them to safety. And then C.S. Lewis kind of points out, little did Shasta know that sometimes the reward for doing good is to have to do a greater and more difficult good.
Right. So it's like this theme of courage in face of fear, while living up to your responsibility is a better good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So even though you're afraid of having to live up to your responsibility, because sometimes it can be terrifying to do so, it's still necessary for you to be doing good. And again, the neglect of doing that good, even if you're afraid, is going to lead to a greater evil.
And what it shows is that the more good that you do, the more, like, it's still going to be difficult to do good. It's not like you get good practice at doing good. Like, sort of.
Yeah.
It's sort of that you get good practice at it, but the good things that you can do and you have opportunity to do become more difficult and greater.
Mm-hmm.
And you gain responsibility over more. We were talking about the parable of the talents. It's my favorite parable because I find it applies to so many things.
Yeah.
And guy who has been given the 5 talents, another guy who's been given 2, and another one who's been given 1, or was it 3 talents?
It was 3 talents.
It was 3 talents. Okay. Well, the guy with the 5 talents, you might say, hey, lucky him, he got 5 and then he got 10 and he has all the stuff. It's, yes, he also has that much power and therefore that much responsibility. he could have wasted it licentiously.
Mm-hmm.
What if he had lost 3? Sure, he would have had 2, and one guy would have had 1, but he would have been punished far worse than one guy having 1.
Right.
Because he lost 3.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's this increase of effort that you need to put in to do
Right.
to do more and more difficult things.
See, it's funny for me, though, when I think about that parable. Again, when you look at it from the wrong perspective, you look at this guy who's been given 5, and you sit there and you think, perhaps, oh, he's been given 5, he's so lucky. But again, you got to consider, this guy's expectation was to make 5 more. That's a lot more stress than the guy who's been given 3 or the guy who's been given 1.
Mm-hmm.
And what's even more so is that once he finally comes out at the end of it with 10 instead of 5, he's then also given the guy who had 1, he's given his talent as well. So he's now bumped himself up from 5 to 11. And so you would expect then his next expectation would then be to produce 11 more, if not even more, right? So it's like the more power you have, the more responsibility you do have. We can see that, right? But it's just, you can't always envy those in power then, because their responsibility is that much greater as well.
I think of that line at the end, to those who have, more will be given.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, kind of. But absolutely, that is exactly what it is. But it's not like to him who has more, he will just have even a better life.
Yeah,
it's
that's not exactly what it's saying at all.
It might be, perhaps it's also, you will have a bit more of a pleasurable life. There's also a lot more to.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more work to be done.
Right.
11's a lot. 11's, I mean, isn't it like 11 cities at the end? In taking care of 11 cities? That's a lot.
Sure. I mean, there's conversation about what the talents represented, but that's a different different conversation for theology and
yeah.
But anyways, yeah, no, you're right. I mean,
so really getting back to this good freedom theme, because it's such a broad one, and also we're going to spiral a lot on this one because it's completely inseparable from power and goodness as well.
right.
And responsibility. There are 2 freedoms that I want to pose against. There's the freedom to do whatever you want, and it's like, yeah, you have freedom, and you have these rights, but don't misuse them to just do whatever you want. That's Eustace's problem. He's
right.
like, I have this right and this right and this right and this right, and leave me alone. I get to do whatever I want. I do not belong to you guys. I'm here for myself, and I'm going to. How dare you have taken me unwillingly with you? And he finds every reason to complain because it's not going his way.
Right.
And because his way is the only important one for him. So that's another key. You can't think of your rights as things that you should be treating as rights for yourself, and as if they were only things for yourself to protect just yourself. And you can't hide behind them to shirk moral responsibility. Your responsibility, in fact, should probably be equaling the rights that you have. Because because your rights say I'm this valuable and I have this much potential, so I must be given this amount of freedom. It's now that freedom will equal the amount of responsibility that you have to do.
Right.
The more rights you're given, the more responsibility you have.
Yeah.
Do not hide behind your rights to shirk responsibility.
Exactly.
It's a complete misuse. And so that's your answer to good freedom question.
All right. That was a good one. That was a bit of a long one. We're not going to spend too much time on the last one. I think we got, 10 minutes left before we want to wrap up. So.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. But also, we try to keep this as real as possible. So there's going to be... Also, I'm learning how to articulate my thoughts better. And so there's going to be a lot of stumbling to the point that we get to our final answer.
Right.
And I hope you guys are enjoying the ride as well.
I hope so.
But
we'll get to the next question then.
Yeah.
So I think one of the bigger ones too we talked about was a little bit of bad for the sake of the greater good. And then there's also this theme of temptation as well. So what would you have to say for that theme in the Chronicles of Narnia?
Well, it's everywhere. Wherever there's temptation, there is that question. One thing that we talked about when we were talking about Lord of the Rings was replacing yourself as the cause for good. So rather than seeing good as something that you should be aiming yourself towards, it's putting yourself in between good and the power to do good, and deciding what that good is.
Right.
So that's one element of doing a little bit of bad for the sake of the greater good. But it's also just the initial action of doing a little bit of bad for the sake. Like, why not conjure up the White Witch in order to bring a better rule and prosperity to Narnia in the end? By the way, not going to happen like that. It never does.
Never does.
But that temptation is there, and it's Satan whispering, why not take of the fruit to the knowledge of good and evil? Knowledge is good.
Mm-hmm.
Even knowledge of evil is good.
Right.
And this way you can become as powerful as God, and power is good, and you will use this power well. I know you will. I believe in you. It's like, do this one little bad thing, maybe just shirk God's law a little bit and do all the good that you can afterwards,
Right.
and you're capable of it. I believe in you.
I think a good example of that we see in the Old Testament would be Uzziah and the Ark, right? The coming of the Ark, where David has this whole procession of people bringing the Ark back from the Philistines, and as they're carrying this Ark over in a cart, and the cart ends up basically breaking its wheel or hitting a rock or something like that, and it ends up falling down about to fall down to the earth, and this man Uzziah reaches out his hand, touches it, and dies. He wants to save the Ark. He wants to do this little bit of bad, because he knows he shouldn't be touching the Ark. It is a bad thing to do so, but he wants to do so for the greater good of preserving the Ark from the dirt in the ground. I don't know if that. I feel like that kind of speaks into the same story.
Yeah. Oh, it's everywhere where there's regarding temptation. Let's talk about Matthew 4. I mean, Jesus is tempted immediately after being called God's beloved, and then Satan's like, "Prove you're beloved. Let's go, man. Let's test this new ordination and
Right.
And affirmed baptism, and not adoption, but almost like as if it were the certificate. Let's test it out. So you can turn these stones into bread. Why not do it?
Yeah.
You have the power. Why not prove it?
Yeah.
God's just given you miracle power.
Yeah.
Let's go, man.
And surely he would have been hungry. So it's not as though it would have been. Right, like it would have been for the greater good. I mean, how can you minister to someone when you're so distracted by hunger?
Exactly.
Right? Like, you can almost hear that temptation being brought into him because he was hungry.
Yeah.
Quite frankly.
Or not only that, throw yourself from the temple, and God will prove, and you will prove that God really cares about you, because He's not going to let you hit the floor. He loves you. So, are you sure? Because if that's the case, He should save you.
Mm-hmm.
No harm done. No harm done. Or at least the littlest possible harm is done.
Right.
And it's such a bluff, because it's like, it looks like a little bit of harm, but afterwards the real consequences happen. What if Jesus had fallen to these temptations?
Right.
He would not have been able to save us.
Mm-hmm.
Because it needed to be a sinless man who died. Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe, Aslan needed to give up his life willingly, and he needed to have done no wrong. Otherwise, he would have been a traitor himself, and he would have died.
Right.
Rightfully so, as a traitor.
Right. Or even you were mentioning, for the sake of greater good, right? Like, I think Peter's also a great example of this too. Not Peter from Narnia, Peter from the Bible. Let's be clear, the Apostle Peter. right, he often takes on the role of, I'm going to do whatever's necessary for the greater good. Right?
Yeah.
Surely you can't go to the cross, Jesus. That like surely you can't go to Jerusalem. I'm going to stop you, and then he gets rebuked by Jesus. Or later on when he's getting arrested.
Opposite. It's almost opposite. It's as if like, here's what looks immediately good, but the greater good is still hidden.
Yeah.
So it's almost like an opposite type of
That's
temptation,
fair,
and
yeah.
that's actually really cool because I didn't think of that.
Right.
It's like
or the counter in the Garden of Gethsemane is the same kind of idea where, right, again, the greater good of Christ going to the cross, and yet Peter wanted to step in and say no and took off the ear of the guy. Well, he has to do whatever he wants for what he deems as good. And again, perfectly right. Like, Peter understood that Christ was innocent. He understood that it was not a good thing for Christ to go to the cross, but there was still that greater good of him actually going to the cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's we can't see future events.
Right.
I always wonder what it would have been like if we could see future events. The problem is that because we are the immediate effectors of the things around us, then could we change what we do and change the future? Then that is slated out for us, and I think so. And then that would be a real problem.
Yeah, I don't want the TVA coming here and taking us off
Oh,
the sacred
I am
timeline.
so looking forward to that. Don't get me started
I
on
brought
Loki.
Loki into this.
Stop it.
Anyways, sorry about that. No, we were going to go back to our topic. Yeah. You know what? I mean, we talked quite a bit about responsibility, duty, and power. I think that was kind of the other discussion we wanted to have. So I think at this point in time, probably not a bad idea to wrap it up.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think just kind of leave the question off to you guys. Did we miss any themes, big themes going on in Chronicles of Narnia? Also, should I read the series again? I feel like I should, but I want to get your guys' opinion on that too. Do you guys think it's like, just a series for kids? Is there something to take away from it as an adult? Yeah, I think these are good conversational pieces.
Also, we have a Discord channel, and this is where you can throw in suggestions. Although you can always do that in the comment section as well.
Yep.
If you're watching it on YouTube. Although I know most of you guys prefer Spotify because you can keep that in. You can keep your phone in your pocket, and Spotify Premium is pretty nice for that.
It's pretty good for that.
But absolutely, any suggestions for how we can improve our quality, but also the things that we can talk about as well. We would love to hear your opinion on that. And if you could, and if you're interested in this content, if you could subscribe on YouTube or follow us wherever you listen to us.
Yeah.
And if you're really invested, join our Discord server for our discussion. That would be awesome.
And just to give you guys a little taste of what's happening next week, I think next week we're going to be talking about Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And J.K. Rowling. And I kind of want to get this out of the way too, is that we're going to be, I think, working through kind of some of the foundational pieces for our mythology, and then we're going to basically be diving into more free-range topics after that. I want to make sure that we cover our bases. I think we're going to be talking about Star Wars after that at some point.
Yeah.
Some point we're going to talk about Marvel as well, but then we really do want to start talking about some of the more specific things in those things.
Yeah.
And so instead of just talking about Lord of the Rings as a whole, we can actually talk about particular things, or Star Wars as a whole. We can talk about The Mandalorian, and I know Joel is just itching at this point to talk about Loki, so but I don't want to really get into that until we've actually covered our bases for what we're doing and why we're doing it. So thank you again for listening, guys, and like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.